Tanner, and I am the director of Onward, a think tank focusing on levelling up opportunity and strengthening our social fabric, especially in the places where those things are weakest. And I am delighted to welcome you today to this event, Tech for 2050, Fostering Innovation in the Pursuit of Net Zero. This is the fourth event in our Clean Comeback series of events, looking at how we can deliver decarbonisation as we emerge from the pandemic. And before I begin today's discussion, I just want to pay tribute to the partners on that series, EDF, who are supporting today's discussion, WWF, Bosch, Uber and BP, because without their support, we wouldn't be able to host important discussions like this one. And so I hope you'll join me in thanking them for their support. Now, everyone at home will be acutely aware of the scale of the climate challenge. We face a gargantuan effort to transform UK industry and consumer behaviour within a pretty tight window of opportunity, fewer than 30 years, in order to mitigate the value and life-destroying effects of climate change. So we should be under no illusions of the scale of that challenge. However, the last 30 years should give us hope. In the last 3 decades, the UK has decarbonised faster than anyone else in the G7 and faster than many of our OECD counterparts. And this has been made possible more than anything by innovation. We've benefited from a number of major breakthrough technologies, most notably electric vehicles and offshore wind. And we've successfully, in this country particularly, created funding and regulatory incentives to encourage their diffusion across the economy and to drive out real gains in terms of reduced emissions. So to succeed over the next 30 years, we're going to need to do that all over again and expand those incentives, apply them to new areas of technology and investment, and drive out real meaningful change across the economy and society. Indeed, the 10th point in the Prime Minister's 10-point plan is that the UK needs to both develop cutting-edge technologies to reach new energy ambitions and to make the City of London a global centre of green finance. So this will require bold policy making, and I'm sure we'll hear from the Minister about the extent of the government's ambitions there. But it will also require private sector innovation. Just last week, the Climate Change Committee made clear that, quote, government alone will not be able to finance the costs of addressing the adverse impacts of climate change, as well as fund the innovations needed to capitalise on any potential opportunities. This will require a partnership between government and private industry. So today I am delighted to bring together a fantastic panel to discuss these themes and actually to get into the detail of how we go about that. So we've set the ambition, we know it's possible, but what do we need to do? And we have, in many ways, I think, the perfect panel to discuss these themes. Our first speaker will be known to many of you. She is the Minister for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, and also the UK champion on adaptation and resilience for COP26 later this year, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Anne-Marie was elected as MP for Berwick-upon-Tweed in 2015. Since then has held a variety of roles, lots of which have touched, I think, on the issue of innovation. So Minister for Defence Procurement, Minister for Armed Forces in the MOD, and then also latterly as Secretary of State for International Development. So she brings a wealth of experience to the role. Then we turn to Alex Stafford. Alex was elected as MP for Rother Valley in 2019, currently serves on the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee, and previously worked in the energy industry, focusing on sustainability, future of mobility, and then going to work for WWF on international environmental issues. And he's currently campaigning on a national hydrogen strategy, which I suspect we may hear a little bit about. Third, we are going to hear from Guy Newey. Now, Guy is the Strategy and Performance Director for the Energy Systems Catapult, which he joined in 2018, having been Energy and Climate Advisor to Greg Clark when he was Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Climate and Industrial Strategy, and previously Special Advisor to Energy Secretary Amber Rudd. And before that, he was Head of Policy at OVO Energy and worked for the think tank Policy Exchange for many years on these very issues. And then finally, last but not least, we're going to turn to Simone Rossi, who is Senior Executive Vice President for International at EDF Energy. Simone joined EDF in 2011 as UK Chief Financial Officer, and has had a career that spans corporate finance with KPMG, consulting with McKinsey, and senior financial roles in Italy with Edison Spa and in the US with Constellation Energy Nuclear. So a fantastic panel, and this is going to work very simply. I'm going to ask each of our speakers to say 5 to 7 minutes or so of opening remarks. We will go each in turn in the order in which I just gave their biographies, and then we're going to open up to Q&A from the floor. If you haven't attended one of our sessions before, the way you ask a question is by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, typing in your question, and then I am going to pose those questions to our panel during the Q&A. And I would just say, please do ask your questions early. Feel free to ask as the speakers are speaking, because that will ensure that I have time to get in your question before the end. We will be finishing promptly at 1 o'clock, and I know the minister needs to leave about 15 minutes early at 12:45. So please do ask your questions early. So without further ado, in the interests of time, I am delighted to hand over to our first speaker, Anne-Marie Trevelyan.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Will, and indeed Onward for inviting me to join your Tech for 2050 panel event. It's a real pleasure to be able to join you this afternoon. So as our economy and our country recover from the pandemic, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build back better and to really focus on fighting climate change. This is why government is working at pace to support communities, businesses, entrepreneurs, and innovators to reach that net zero target by 2050. Continued public investment in innovation at all stages, including cutting-edge research, development, and demonstration levels, is going to be integral to achieving this transformation. Because, of course, innovation is a key driver for reducing the cost of clean technologies. And we know that continued support is needed since we don't yet have all the solutions required to reach our ambitious targets, though I have no doubt at all that we will, because the British ingenuity is world-class. So that's why this government is really focusing on supporting those key technologies of the future and working with partners to pull existing and proven technologies through to commercialization and to identify those technologies and approaches that are still in those early stages or indeed yet to be discovered, but which could shift the dial against those targets that we know we have to meet. So, for example, to support our ambition, we published a 10-point plan last year. Point 10 of the plan, as Will says, sets out our ambition for the UK to be a global leader in the technologies needed to decarbonise our economies and transition to net zero. Together with the UK's world-class innovators, entrepreneurs and financial institutions, we are going to focus progress on the key technologies of the future. Alongside ambitious green policies across sectors from transportation to agriculture, this is also going to be backed by a record increase in public investment in research and innovation across the whole economy. For example, to accelerate the commercialization of innovative low-carbon technologies, systems and processes in the power, buildings and industrial sectors, we launched our £1 billion net zero innovation portfolio. So the portfolio is focusing on 10 priority areas, including floating offshore wind, energy storage, hydrogen, direct air capture, industrial fuel switching, and disruptive technologies such as artificial intelligence. Because, of course, many of these are areas in which the UK already is or has the potential to be. So government's also working closely with other partners such as UKRI, which funds and supports research, innovation and skills, which are going to help us to deliver those low and zero carbon solutions across transport, agriculture and heating, and things like cooling systems, as well as infrastructure and services. So it's why we will shortly be publishing the innovation strategy and in the autumn, the net zero strategy, all of which are going to move us closer to delivering on our targets, which is, to Will's point, incredibly important as the UK prepares to host COP26 in Glasgow in November. But of course, government cannot deliver net zero on its own. We need to work together to accelerate that innovation and to deploy those innovative approaches, which will help us to constantly improve and discover new opportunities. And of course, ultimately, we want public investment to catalyse and stimulate substantial private sector investment in innovation and indeed in citizen participation in the use of it, a really important part of actually delivering it. Never before, I think, has the UK been so committed to fighting climate change as we are now, and I'm really looking forward to working with all of you and your networks to make sure that we can reach those ambitious targets. Thanks, Will.
Anne-Marie, thank you so much, and it's fantastic to hear about the government's ambitions and your plans. And I totally agree that the UK is incredibly well placed to lead this charge. The question is there kind of how do we go about it, and what do we need to give you as minister to help us achieve those goals? So I hope we can get into some of those themes in the ensuing discussion. Can I now turn to Alex Stafford? Alex, very interested to hear your perspective, both as a member of the Bay Select Committee, but also as someone who's been entwined in these debates for many years.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. It's an honour to speak on this topic, a topic which I've done a lot of professional work when I worked for WWF and Shell on, and also now in Parliament on the Bay Select Committee. Now, I would call myself a climate positivist. Climate change is happening. It's a big threat, but I'm not one of these doom and gloom mongers out there. I don't believe we're going to hell in a handcart in 10 years. I don't believe, all the icebergs are about to melt and all the polar bears are about to die. But the reason I believe that is I believe we as humans have the power to deal with climate change. And that power, frankly, is our innovative technology and our new ways of working, new ways of thinking. So to me, this is a very apposite topic to discuss. And the Minister has already touched on some great things the government's done. And I'm intrigued by what the Minister said, because there are a few things which I didn't hear in the Minister. And I hope she won't mind if I highlight some of those missing points. And the first one is going to be about how we build our homes. We talk a lot about building back better, which is quite right, and the need for more homes in this country, which clearly we do. But we are frankly building the wrong sort of homes at the moment. Why do we not have a policy, and I think we should have a policy, where all new homes built, especially those with spaces for a garage or a driveway, is mandatory to have electric charge point for electric vehicle? To me, that is crazy that we don't have that. Likewise, we know in 10 years' time, each new home will have a battery in. You'll have your solar photovoltaic panels on the roof, which will take energy from the sun, and there'll be a battery in your homes. We need to be building homes now that are going to be carbon ready in 10 years' time. So we need to have homes which are space for instance, a battery, which we all know homes will be doing it. And it's far easier to build those homes now, even when technology is not exactly there, but getting there, rather than trying to retrofit homes. At the moment, we're having the big discussion about retrofitting heating systems into homes, whether it's heat pumps, whether it's hydrogen in the pipes. And it's going to be vastly more expensive doing that retrofitting than actually putting the space in already. So we need to start thinking about how we build now for the future. We haven't got time to wait. But I know my time is very limited, so I want to touch on a couple of other things. Will, you already mentioned hydrogen. And to me, hydrogen is one of the most exciting technologies we in the UK can use and can leverage to deal with our carbon futures. Because when we have to deal with climate change, we also have to realise that this is an opportunity for the UK, and frankly, an opportunity for the UK to make money and export our products abroad. We talk about, once again, building back better and recovering post-COVID. But unless there's new technology and new jobs, we can't do that. We can't only tinker around the edge otherwise. And for me, hydrogen and the opportunity for hydrogen is that opportunity to actually have a new industry. And although the technology, once again, isn't quite there, at the moment, hydrogen is the only game in town when it comes to decarbonisation of the heavy-duty transport, HGVs, buses, really, let alone planes and boats. There's nothing else in the market. So for me, I'm desperate to see the government's hydrogen strategy, which is slightly delayed, to put it mildly, to how we deal with this. Because I very much believe if we get there first, more than any other country, we can actually then export and sell that technology abroad. But I think electric vehicles are going to be incredibly important technology for short distances, for passenger cars. But frankly, we have missed that boat. China controls the entire battery market. 75% of 72% of all lithium-ion batteries are made in China, and 75% of components of those batteries are made in China. So we have missed that market, frankly. We are not going to get any financial benefit out of this. Whereas for hydrogen, because we've got places like Wrightbus, and we actually have a quarter of all hydrogen components are made in the UK anyway, we already have that natural advantage. So what we need to do, and the government to do, is leverage these natural advantages when it comes to new technology, clean technology, so we can actually have a benefit when it comes to jobs and the economy, as well as for carbon and climate change. But there is one more elephant in the room I think no discussion nowadays can have or should be have, and that is about how these batteries, how this green technology is made, and that is critical minerals, rare earths. And just give examples. On average, each electric car uses about 100 kilograms of copper, rare earth for magnets, lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite for the batteries. And to meet the Prime Minister's vision for wind power, which is great, we need more than 26,000 tonnes of rare earths and more than 4,000 tonnes of copper. Now, this is incredibly important. And we in the UK are not a rich country when it comes to these rare earths. We need to develop that sector, because if we don't have that, because the whole world is going low carbon and the whole world is using the same minerals, and we need to make sure that we have a proper control of our supply chain to get these. At the moment, the vast majority of cobalt is mined and nickel is mined in the DRC with appalling human rights record, and most of those mines some way are controlled by China, which is not a safe country. And we saw that during the PPE crisis last March, where China frankly pulled the drawbridge out. So they made nearly all our PPE, and because they needed to have a squeeze on it, they refused to send any to us in some cases, or they said sent sub-quality ones. So we as a government and a country need to make sure we have complete control over the supply chain, whether that is develop our own homegrown industries, such as, for instance, the lithium mines down in Cornwall, or if it's doing deals and trade deals on these particular issues when it comes to democratic, safe countries. Australia has a huge critical minerals project, mining. We need to have better trade deals with those to make sure that we'll have a constant supply of the minerals we need to actually build that low carbon future. There's no point having grand ambitions for a low carbon future with great technology, which I completely support, if you don't have control over those minerals that go into it. So I know my 5 minutes are up, so that's a quick overview of some of the important things we need to address.
Alex, thank you so much, and I completely agree that there is a kind of deep question which I was planning to ask on anyway about the the kind of raw materials, the kind of inputs into some of these technologies to ensure that we actually have the ability to develop new carbon technologies as well as the ingenuity, as the minister said. Perhaps to answer that question and to get into some others, I'm delighted to hand over now to Guy Newey from Energy Systems Catapult. Guy.
Thanks, Will. So I'm going to start off by being provocative and saying that the biggest innovation challenge for net zero is perhaps not some of these big tech questions we've talked about, although they are hugely important. You know, how are you going to get the cost of green hydrogen down? Small modular reactors, how they're going to work in the system. Exactly the kind of rare earth. It's great, by the way, to hear somebody talk about rare earths. You know, how are we going to think about renewables pipeline that's actually going to manage without some of these rare earth issues. These are all important, but perhaps the biggest innovation challenge we face in the UK context is how we come up with consumer-facing, low-carbon products and services that people actually want. That they not just they want, they're delighted by, they desire, they kind of, you know, competing to get hold of it. Because when you're talking about heating and transport, which is the next wave of decarbonisation in the UK, these are people-facing activities in a horribly jargonistic way. You know, people matter. You know, I absolutely take Alex's point about, you know, new build homes, but 90%, something like that, of the homes that we're going to have in 2050 already exist. We shouldn't be making the problem any worse, but the key challenge is how do we come up with you know, low carbon heating solutions that people are really going to want and demand, not just that they, because it's not going to work if we're forcing them onto people. So how do they have things that are better than what they've got at the moment? So, you know, what are the innovators we work with at the Catapult? And, you know, a big part of our job is supporting some of the amazing SMEs and companies who are coming through with these the products and services. What do they want and what do they need? Well, the first thing and the most important thing, and I'm sure there'll be, you know, people talking about funding for innovation and all those important issues, but the most important thing is a market framework that allows them to compete. These guys don't want to spend a lot of time lobbying for a particular carve out or regulation, etc. They want a level playing field and they want to win on a level playing field. So that's about getting carbon incentives right across the economy, which are frankly a bit of a mess at the moment, for all sorts of sensible political reasons, but for But then, you know, if we're serious about climate change challenge, we need to do that. We need to get the electricity market fit for a kind of smarter digital world where we have a much more flexible system. And those are big priorities for the government. Get that framework right so that people can compete. One of the big areas where we're seeing a huge amount of innovation is in digital technology in energy. You know, energy, if I'm being kind, is kind of at the foothills of the potential of digital technology, certainly compared to mobile telephones and other areas. And that's manifesting itself in a huge number of ways. But of course, one of the most exciting ways is, again, back to this consumer-facing side. You know, whether it's you know, actually working out whether how leaky your home is, that it's not all based on, you know, kind of weird Deem scores. It's actually, you know, using sensors, etc., to work out how it is. Giving people room by room control of their heating through their smartphone. You know, being able to charge up their electric vehicle when it's cheap, etc. The digital technology is really coming in. So government's job is to make sure that is working, and crucially, in the kind of engineers that I work with, that it's interoperable. That's not just about all the devices being able to talk to each other, but also that you don't get, you know, you sign a contract with one company that's going to provide you with low carbon heating for 5 years, and you don't get stuck with them forever, as it were. You know, that you've got this commercial level interoperability in the jargon, which will really allow this market to thrive in the same way that we, you know, making people's numbers transferable on mobile phones was really important. And the third thing that they really want is skills. And I know Onward are doing some fantastic work in this area. You know, the number of jobs across the industry that are going to be needed is absolutely huge, particularly again when we go back to the domestic building space. You know, we're going to need hundreds of thousands of people who can be fitting heat pumps, looking at other low carbon heating solutions, heat networks, hydrogen, etc. And we need people to be skilled in that area. So real strong focus on the consumer is absolutely essential, is the big challenge. Just because, you know, when you have an innovation event, you've got to talk about big tech to a certain extent. Couple that I would identify as huge priorities. So first of all is everything in the kind of broad family of nuclear, and I'm sure Simone will come on to talk about some of those innovation priorities. But getting the cost of nuclear power down, you know, having a systematic strategic approach to nuclear, as well as seeing the opportunity and things like low carbon heat and hydrogen that nuclear can actually be joining. I think that's an incredibly exciting area. Certainly when I was in government, we talked a lot about it. We haven't made as much progress as we need to on things like advanced modular reactors, small modular reactors, etc. And really, you've just got to go, you've got to go for it. You've got to decide that it's important. And the other area which, you know, is going to need absolutely huge innovation is around industrial processes. So it's great to see the minister identify that as one of the priorities. When you shifted from 80% to net zero, all the industrial processes, you know, whether it's cement or ceramics, suddenly woke up and thought, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was actually about us. Now it definitely is about us. And again, that could be, you know, a really interesting opportunity for the UK. And the final one I'd say, which again, you know, if I'd say consumer is, you know, consumer low carbon products and services consumer wants is the number one. The second innovation challenge, which is as big as all the, you know, huge technology challenges that we've talked about, is about integration. This stuff needs to work together. The best metaphor I've had for net zero is as if you've got to change the entire engine of a plane while the plane is still flying. And, you know, we can't stop the electricity system for 4 or 5 years. So we until everything works. It needs to keep on working. And so making sure, you know, when everyone in the street buys an EV and that the local network can cope with that, and that the market structures and the digital integration, etc., all works together. That integration challenge is as significant as any of the big tech innovation challenges, and we've really got to, you know, we've got to spend as much time thinking about that as we do as some of the perhaps more sexy technology challenges which tend to dominate the debate. Thanks, Will.
Guy, thank you so much. That was a massive kind of tour de force covering a huge amount of ground. And I was very, very taken by your first point that actually the biggest innovation challenge is not necessarily the kind of big sexy things that policymakers tend to focus on, but actually how do you create amazing, innovative products that consumers want to buy? A kind of fascinating question, which I know lots of venture capital firms are focusing on quite heavily at the moment. So I'm now going to come to our final speaker of the panel before we go into Q&A, and that is Simone Rossi from EDF. So Simone, over to you.
Thank you, Will, and thank you, Guy, Alexandra, and Anne-Marie. Quite compelling points you made. I hope not to disappoint you with mine. I'd like to say first that listening to you, and I was thinking, okay, hydrogen is a big thing. I think we all agree. But in order to make hydrogen, how do we make it? We need electricity to make it in the first place. I was thinking about low carbon heat. Of course, we need our homes going forward differently. We might need heat pumps, in which case, well, we need electricity, or hydrogen, and hydrogen goes back electricity, or mobility, of course. Well, the big deal is, you know, for cars, it's electricity. Or for heavy vehicles, Alexander, like you said, you know, we have the opportunity to switch to hydrogen, which requires electricity. So it all sounds like all roads are leading to electricity here. So as a country, we now consume about 300 something terawatt hours of electricity per year to run our trains, to, you know, to do the things that we do. According to the Committee for Climate Change, we might need, if we go all the way to this electricity, as much as twice as much by 2050. Well, personally, I have some doubts, but, you know, it could be, but it's certainly going to be more than today. So we might need 400, 500, 600, I don't know, a big number. So there is a key question underpinning all of this stuff, which is how do you produce it in the first place? And of course, part of the answer will be through the solar panels on top of our homes, etc., etc. That will contribute size of it. Of course, there is wind offshore, which will be probably the lion's share, but wind offshore sometimes needs to deal with the high pressure on top of the British Isles where there's little wind, etc. So I think that we have, there is a role to play, there is a job to be done for also nuclear in terms of producing this electricity. And I wanted just to cover a couple of things, which is what are the features that sometimes people take for granted, but are actually quite important, why nuclear could be an interesting choice for the country to be part of the mix. First question. And second, in which way do we think this could be an opportunity to make real some of these innovations we've been talking about? So there are 5 features of nuclear that I keep in mind when we think about, you know, why it would be important. The first, it's sovereign. So you know, we are interconnected with other countries, of course, through electricity cables. We can get gas from halfway across the world through LNG. But when it comes to our security of supply or the price we have to pay for those things, I think it's vital, fundamentally important that for a country which happens to be an island to have its own part of sovereign sources, and nuclear is one such sovereign. You know, with the exception that you still need to buy uranium. So we go back maybe to some of the topics that Alexander was raising. You know, we just need to make sure that we've got a stable supply of the minerals that we need. In that case, it will be uranium, which is fairly abundant in most countries that we seem to be dealing with, you know, reasonably easily. The second is that proven. I mean, it's really so dull, isn't it? You know, it works. It's actually not a technology of the future, it's a technology of the past, to be frank with you. And I would say, wow, you know, why do we need a technology of the past? There is so much excitement about new things. And I think rightfully so, because we will certainly find a better solution in the future than the currently available ones. And we need to invest our funds to do that. At the same time, I think to be prudent, we have to have a mix of things, which we can't bet the house on future stuff only. I think part of proven solutions in the mix would be interesting. Therefore, the interest of the large-scale nuclear, which for the time being is proven. The third characteristic is that it's always on. So regardless of the weather, so it's diversified relative to renewables. That is the reason why all modeling done by government, etc., shows that a system with a proportion of nuclear, it doesn't need to be a lot, but a proportion of nuclear costs less than a system which is entirely on renewables, precisely because this diversification enables a reduction of system cost to keep the system running, let me say, all has been equal. the fourth characteristic is compact. Now, you might think about compact, it's gonna be crazy. If any of you ever visited Hinkley Point C site, and I know the minister did fairly recently, it's anything but compact. You see, it's a large site, yeah, but per unit of energy produced, it's the most compact solution you can have in terms of usage of land, usage of materials, concrete, steel, you name it. You can take any of these material and land consumption, and it's about 100 times or hundreds of times more compact than any available alternative. That surely must have an interest and a value for us, as we also care about the use of our land to maintain biodiversity and also absorb carbon and farm it, amongst other things. And the fifth is employment. I mean, I know for a fact today we've got 15,000 people whose salaries are paid by Hinkley Point C, whose construction is underway. And over the period of construction, these infrastructures, there's about 70,000 jobs opportunities. These are all jobs that are not in Westminster, that are, up and down the country in engineering, construction, manufacturing. So the type of jobs that we need as an economy, and to leverage on some of our strengths, to use Alexander's words. It's not just, there is a nuclear industry in the UK, there is a base of skills that we have, and it's surprisingly domestic, and an investment in a large nuclear station, 70% of the value stays in the country. So it's quite high compared to, let me say, a number of alternatives. My last point is to say, so in which way could this represent an innovation, if I may say? Well, the first innovation is even more dull. We have an opportunity with the South Sea project to copy and paste the Hinkley Point C design. So in which way copying is an innovation is a bit of a question, but actually the best way to keep the nuclear costs under control is actually to start with a known design, which is the opportunity we have with South Sea. The second thing is the construction itself. So we are working very hard with also some participation from JCB and a government initiative on how to convert all the vehicles, the heavy vehicles needed for construction, from diesel, like they are today, into hydrogen, just to demonstrate that we can walk the talk. The third is direct air capture, because it's certainly possible to use the power produced by a nuclear station in continuum, or at times when there is too much power, to also power direct air capture efficient solutions which use high temperature, which will be available alongside the power station. And last but not least, the production of hydrogen itself. So the South station will be built with a embedded option to spill some steam to use in high temperature electrolyzers, which could produce hydrogen. Again, to be used in the economy in the different ways, as an alternative, as a partial alternative to just a constant stable electricity production. So to have this option available. So we're very excited about all those opportunities, and to be able to work with government in the context of the 10-point plan, which covers, I would say, everything. And we hope to be able, with government, to bring this new project to fruition in this race to net zero. Thank you.
Simone, thank you so much. That was brilliant. I was furiously taking up some notes as you were talking. It's fantastic to hear about your plans and your case for nuclear as being part of the mix. I want to abuse the chair's privilege and ask a question, particularly to the minister, but interested in others' thoughts too. Just reflecting on the discussion we've had so far, I'm very conscious that we've touched on a number of technologies. We've talked about nuclear, we've talked about direct air capture, we talked about hydrogen, we talked about renewables, and the list goes on. And this does relate to one of the questions in the Q&A from Alexander Luke, which is the extent to which we should be kind of backing everything and setting a kind of 1,000 hairs off and seeing which ones race the fastest and likely to get us to the destination as quickly as possible, or the extent to which we should be putting our eggs in one or two baskets to a large degree. And I'm very conscious that, the New York Times this week has a magazine article out arguing that we should try everything basically to try and get to net zero, and it will require a kind of completely agnostic and very ambitious, far-reaching agenda to get there. But there are others who say that there are some technologies which just simply either much more likely to be much more important, have much more capacity, or where the UK potentially has more kind of natural advantages, where we might want to focus our energies. And so I just want to kind of start with that question: should we be letting 1,000 flowers bloom, or should we be choosing? And crucially, if we want to let 1,000 flowers bloom, how do we fund it? Who pays? And who's kind of making those decisions? Because it's a kind of fundamental question at the heart of this debate. So if I could start with the Minister, and perhaps if others want to come in, just signal to you and to me, and I'll bring you in. Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Will. So I think at this stage, we are much more in the 1,000 flowers blooming scenario, because if you look at the Climate Change Committee's sort of, modelling, we're looking at everything. So not only are we decarbonising the sources of the power and the heat that we're going to use, we're changing the tools that we as citizens and businesses will use that power through. We are also thinking about how we alter every part of our lives in this transition, as we, every time you move house or buy a new car, you think differently and need the tools to help you live a much more net zero type of life. So we are looking across the gamut of all our lives at the moment, at a consumer side, and if government's focus in these first stages is really thinking about decarbonising the power and heat that we all then get to choose to use. So we are looking across the board, and I mean, I think to Simone's point, really saying that nuclear is a technology of the past. It is a base technology which has this depth of stability and long-term investment to it, which is incredibly powerful. But nuclear, that sense of stable power generation, feeds to the SMR and the AMR debate, which of course are technologies which are not yet. If nuclear is the past and the present, they are not yet. They are still in the future, but they're coming, and they're coming at pace. So government absolutely has to be a key driver in investing and leading that forwards. But at the same time, trust that both the investment houses and indeed the technologists are wanting to drive that forwards, for economic and altruistic reasons. So I think there's a real mix here. Huge investments that government and industry have made in offshore wind, for instance, over the last few years, to both first to demonstrate it, and indeed to now really have it as part of the mix. But that's only step one. The next generation of that, we're committed from 10 gig to 40 gig in the next few years, literally, is a huge. It's not that it's not a matter of just building more of them. We have to think about the impacts. We have to think about an offshore transmission grid, and the technology that goes with that. So we're in an iterative process. So looking across the piece, I think, is absolutely vital at the moment. And that's why the net zero strategy in the autumn is going to be, if you like, that first crystallization of government's perspective, which says, right, here it is in the round, coming at it from every angle. And from here, we step into the next stage.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Did any other, Guy, you wanted to come in on that question, and then I'll probably move on to the next question, if that's okay. So Guy.
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, the raw maths of net zero challenge means you've got to make progress on a number of fronts. It is some of the numbers are absolutely staggering. So you can't mess around. I think thinking in areas where they're going to be internationally important, and where the UK is going to have a comparative advantage, which is the kind of sweet spot you're looking for. There are some obvious contenders. Various aspects of nuclear, including around the high temperature heating reaction, our slightly odd history in nuclear power could really help us here in a strange kind of way. Certainly around carbon capture and hydrogen, are areas where our oil and gas heritage could potentially be really important. I would stress again, I think one area where we could have a comparative advantage is around this digital tech, particularly the consumer facing tech. We're relatively early adopters in the UK. We're quite willing to try stuff. We're also really good in international standards at again, slightly you don't necessarily think of about innovation, but standards and market design questions and regulation. Because of we've moved early on privatization, etc. We've got a cohort of people who really think hard about how this stuff works in practice. And again, it could enable that digital transformation in energy, and the UK could be the heart of that if it really went for it.
Thank you, Guy. I'm now going to take the first question that we heard from Malcolm Harbour, who's asked specifically about the role of public sector procurement in all of this. So the government is clearly setting regulatory systems, thinking about tax incentives, but it also has a role in procuring new systems and new technologies and rolling them out in different ways. And so I was going to come to Alex and then Simone on that question. Simone, from your experience at EDF and your experience engaging with the public sector around procurement issues, but also Alex, from your view on the BEIS Select Committee. And I know that the Minister has to leave at 12:45. So if we get to that point and I don't have a chance to thank you properly and you need to jump off, Minister, can I just say thank you so much for joining us and for being so open in your remarks as well. But Alex, if I can come to you first and then I'll come to Simone.
Yeah, well, the procurement is hugely important, and it's hugely important for two ways. First of all, because obviously economies of scale, and secondly, because I do think we all need to almost back different technologies. I mean, the government to lead the way. I mean, a clear example is like the COVID vaccinations. The government backed loads of different types of vaccinations, knowing that some of them would come off, but not all of them. And I think we need to do the same with carbon solutions. We need to back a whole lot of different technologies, realizing that quite a lot won't work or won't be the silver bullet, but some of them will be. And I believe if we crack that, goes back to my point, we can then help fund more jobs and exports. So actually, it'll be worth it in the long run. One thing about public procurement I'll talk about there briefly is the role of local councils to play. I think it's very important. There's going to be lots of different solutions to our carbon problems. Talk about home heating, so you could do your heat pumps or hydrogen in the pipes. In some areas, heat pumps are going to be the best solution. In some ways, in some places, hydrogen pipes will be the best solutions. So we need to have local councils, frankly, the best way to work out in their areas what is the best solution for their problem and work procurement that way. We shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all from the government saying this is the solution to our carbon problems. We're not going to get that, and we need to work carefully with local councils on that.
Thank you very much, Alex. And that actually accords quite strongly with some of the recommendations from Onwards Getting to Zero programme, which we have stressed the role of devolution in all of this, and particularly the role of metro mayors potentially in driving some of these decarbonisation kind of diffusion problems out. If I could now come to Simone, I'd be fascinated in your view of public procurement, and also just interested in if there are other countries around the world that do this better than the UK that we could learn from, or areas where the UK has particular strengths that we should seek to leverage. Simone.
To me, the best possible example worldwide that I know of is the CFD applied in the UK for offshore wind in particular. It's a magic tool that deals with market risk and credit risk. In business, normally it's impossible to get rid of both risk at the same time, but this tool does. And the outcome of that is this incredible success of this industry in the UK. When it comes to, it's a form of public procurement in a way, and I would say a very successful one. We operate a renewable business globally, and in EDF, we do not have any evidence of any other place which has a more effective system than the one that was, conceived here in the UK. When it comes to large nuclear, I'm afraid that probably that tool that we tried, we deployed actually on Hinkley Point C, is probably, with hindsight, not the most effective, because for this type of very large infrastructures, it could easily lead, and it does lead, to a relatively high cost of capital, which translates into, higher prices for the production of the plant. So that's the gist of the discussions. So the potential innovation around the financing of these type of infrastructures that we're now having with government, whereby government would always be an enabler. I mean, without the government underpinning this investment, it's just simply not possible. But it would be an enabler for a potentially still a private finance solution within a different framework, the framework of the regulated asset base, which is another way of publicly procure goods, well known in the energy industry, that we're now attempting to deploy on Sizewell C. But as I said, it's quite interesting because I would agree that this is an area where UK has always been at the forefront of innovation. It certainly is one of the core skills of the country, just for the sheer, amount of skills in this area, and one that is well suited to be amongst the top 10, to be innovative in this area and to enable the role of the state, an intelligent role of the state, to make those things happen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Simone. And I know that we have just lost the minister, so I'm very grateful to her for sparing the time, and sorry we weren't able to say goodbye properly. But can we now come to our next question? And I'm hoping to get at least 2 questions in before we close at 1 o'clock. So our next question will be from Phil McNally, who has asked, we have a requirement for system-wide transformational change and specific solutions to meet local needs, as Alex was just saying. Is the current institutional framework suited to meet these dual objectives? I.e., do we have the right organizations and institutions at local and national level to deliver such system-wide change? And yeah, Guy, I was planning to come to you. I mean, you sit in one of those institutions at the Energy Systems Catapult. I'd be fascinated in your view on how the UK's institutional framework fares against some of the challenges we face.
So no is the short answer. As Phil said, there's a couple of dimensions to that in terms of what's missing. So the first builds on a point that I thought Alex made really well, which was about the local national. When you're talking about heat decarbonisation, or you're talking about transport decarbonisation, these are locally specific challenges, right? Decarbonising Cornwall, very different to decarbonising Stoke or whatever. You need to understand the local conditions, the building stock, the state of the electricity grids, the potential for the gas network, etc. Right? And so you need to think about those things. And at the moment, we don't really have that anywhere in our institutional arrangements. So you've got 308 or something like that local authorities or combined authorities declaring climate emergencies, and I would guess probably 10 have got a decent plan on how to do that. And we at the Catapult spend a lot of time thinking about what that local area energy planning should be. But that's one bit we're really missing. And the other bit which is kind of missing is actually a kind of market architecture, really thinking about how the future markets are going to work, because we've got a market. If I'm very crude, we've built a market system which is based on a relatively small number of power stations, controlled by national grids and through various kind of successful market processes, and then meeting the needs with quite a lot of spare capacity in the system, as it were. So relatively few, probably a couple of hundred of key actors at the power sector end. That is going to change completely, because we're going to have, first of all, a very variable system, a very windy system. So and the wind doesn't blow all the time. And at the other end, you're going to have people with electric vehicles and electric heat pumps and probably more electric stuff, as it were, that needs to work. And so that is a much more complex system with millions of people interacting in a much more sophisticated way, controlled through digital technology, all of those kind of issues. And the architecture for that is very different. It's going to require different market design. It's going to require different, back to issues I raised around digital interoperability and things like that. And right now, there's not quite a body that looks at that. There's a bit of the system operator, there's a bit of Ofgem, there's a bit of BEIS, there's a bit of other departments, etc. Nobody quite owns that architecture problem. That's not saying that you should get away from markets. It's about making markets work for that actually allow innovation to flourish. And I think those two, the local, national, and the kind of market infrastructure, are the two big missing parts of the institutional arrangements.
Thank you, Guy. Can I just ask, Simone, do you agree with that? Do you, sitting at a national level, engaging with national regulators and departments, do you think that there is a lack of kind of organising kind of principles and kind of market design within the UK? How does the UK fare against other jurisdictions you work in, or what's the EDF perspective on that?
I can give you my own point of view. Sure. I think that there are a little bit too many bodies, if I have to say, lots of thinking minds. So that's great to get, lots of thinking, etc. But then when, the rubber needs to hit the road, you may want maybe to consider, some consolidation. On one hand, it's very healthy to have independent authorities. So to have an independent, infrastructure, authority, a climate change commission, etc., of GEM. Now, within national grid, there are some responsibilities that might be carved out eventually. I don't know. So, and this feature of independence is very important. So sometimes it's even an obsession of independence, isn't it? And they are also independent. And eventually, how do we, kind of make a choice happen is complex. So that would be my feeling. Just a note on markets. We've seen what happened in Texas a few months ago. At the beginning of the year, there was a cold wave, etc. So some people, some customers, many, actually thousands of customers, were signed up for very innovative deals where they buy the power on the wholesale market directly, etc. And there the price went to $9,000 per megawatt hour for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 days in a row, and that wrought havoc, let me say, to thousands of families, literally, and not to mention the upheaval. So just for us to be aware of it, because in the UK, for example, at the beginning of the year, there was a day where maybe for half a day, prices were about £4,000 per megawatt hour. So I would say today we are in the fortunate environment where those risks are taken by the energy players, energy suppliers, the energy, etc. So we take those risks on behalf of the citizens, of the final consumers, and etc. So while on one end we would want the market forces to go further and to enable this digital economy, etc., but if there is a period of time where there is no wind for 4 or 5 days in the middle of the winter, that won't be a good moment for anybody, in this system. So I think we need to be very, very careful about considering the people who will be exposed. They won't be able to heat themselves, won't be able to recharge their batteries, won't be able to drive their cars, maybe for a few days on end because they can't afford to do it. So, so I think, we need to consider the feedback from those early experimentations and build it sufficient protection, it's my contention, so that people are not unduly exposed to some of the spikes in the system that would otherwise deliver great outcomes for 99.9% of the year. But what matters if that is for 3 days, you can't use really the electricity that you need, people are going to be really unhappy.
Thank you very much, Simone. Alex, for the final question, if I could possibly, I just want to pick up the remarks that you made earlier about critical rare earth minerals, because it seems to me this is a kind of area of the debate that is massively under discussed, but strategically completely and utterly critical. And I'm very interested in what you think we should be doing about critical rare earth minerals, given the UK has some resources in things like lithium, but perhaps not in others. Like what is the kind of long-term plan to secure a stable supply of critical rare earth minerals in order to ensure that we can kind of deliver some of the innovative technologies we've discussed today?
Yes, thank you. I don't want to apologize. Also, my battery is about 6% of my computer, so if I die, the battery game's over. But I completely agree with you. Yes, there's three things we need to do. First of all, we need to develop our own home market, and there is a home supply in Cornwall, in parts of Northern Ireland, of different critical minerals. But even if we exploit those to their fullest, we won't have nearly enough what we need now, let alone in the future. Secondly, we need, as I mentioned, those trading links with those secure democratic countries. Both, I think, like Australia, I've already mentioned, Denmark, via Greenland. I know the new Greenland government there is less excited about exploiting their minerals, but Greenland is full of critical minerals. They've also got America and also quite a large place in the Commonwealth as well. I think Malawi as well and Tanzania have quite a big amount of critical minerals. So develop those links with those countries who are frankly friendly with us. But I think where we can really shine as a country is the processing side. So even in Australia now, a lot of the rare earths are exploited in Australia. They're then shipped to China to get processed and then shipped back to Australia. There's no reason, frankly, why we can't capture some of that processing market in the UK. And particularly in seats like mine, Rother Valley, so with these red wall seats, former coal mining seats, we have a lot of technically high skilled labour still available, we can actually develop that homegrown processing plant and get the government to help sort of set that up, so that when we can get those minerals over from Australia or the countries, we can then process them in the UK and they have greater control over it. So it's not just about the exploitation of the minerals, it's also about how we turn them into something relevant. And that is where the UK, we can actually make a difference, and where frankly this government should need to put more emphasis in. And finally, we do need the government really to embrace this. Like, Australia has a critical minerals strategy already. We don't. There's not even close to it. We need to really realise that this is a huge issue. And it's not just about renewables and technology. There's like hundreds of kilograms of rare earths going to the F fighters as well. So for our latest fighter jets, we need that as well. So it's such a fundamentally important issue, which we're really not embracing.
Fantastic, thank you, Alex. That's an incredibly good way to end the discussion, because it kind of brings us back actually to the fundamentals of all of this. Like, we can talk about innovation as much as we like, but unless we have the raw materials, and to use another type of raw material that Guy talked about, some of the skills necessary to exploit those raw materials, and indeed some of the intellectual property to do so in a commercial environment, we are unlikely to get there. I'm going to bring the session to a close there. I'm sure we could have carried on for much longer, and we've had lots of comments and questions in the Q&A. So I'm really grateful for everyone who asked a question. And actually, I should just say Malcolm Harbour in the Q&A has just highlighted a report from the University of Birmingham into rare and critical minerals that people may want to read. So I'm just going to close the session there. I found this session completely fascinating. We've discussed a huge amount in a very, very short space of time. So I'm incredibly grateful to all of our panelists and to EDF for supporting this discussion and making it possible. We will take away the insights from today's discussion and put them straight into Onwards Getting to Zero programme, which Guy Newey sits on the steering group of, and which I know that Alex and others have been engaging with through Parliament. This is a vital issue, and it's vitally important that we get it right, not just for our kind of climate future, but also for our political future, given the politics of net zero, as we, I think, all know, are kind of hotting up. So we are keen to play our part in this debate and ensure that we are spotting the opportunities, helping policymakers to develop them, and also helping to deliver the reduction in emissions that we need to deliver, not just as a country, but as a kind of as a world, in order to save future generations. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to everyone who tuned in at home, because it's brilliant to have such a fantastic and informed audience. And thank you to everyone who's been supporting our work in this. I hope you'll continue to engage with Onward in the coming weeks and months, and look forward to seeing you at a future event too. So thank you all very much. Thank you to our speakers, and goodbye.